Welcome to Relationship Truth Unfiltered, a podcast that ditches destructive traditions and delves into real biblical teaching about relationships. Welcome. If you're ready for a raw, real look at rebuilding life and rediscovering self-worth, this episode is for you. Or if you just love an Australian accent like me, then you're in for a treat. True story, I changed my Alexa voice to an Australian man, so don't judge. But today's guest is Jessica, a beautiful Aussie Christian who realized shortly after marriage that she had married a very destructive person. Jessica, welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
You said one of your pastimes is bush something. What is it?
Oh, like bushwalks?
Bushwalk.
Yeah, basically hiking. It's just for Australians. We have the bush. I guess you'd call it scrub. I mean, that's probably even more Australian.
The woods or the forest?
The woods, I guess, the forest, the woods,
Okay.
anything outdoors. I love being outdoors. I love walking outside. The more remote, I mean, not too remote. I like a hot meal at the end of the day, but something remote. I really enjoy getting outdoors.
It's so funny because it's later at night here and daytime where you are, and so I was trying to threaten all my children, that I have this interview and you guys are going to have to be quiet because, obviously they're home, and I got all the shrimp on the Barbie jokes and all the ask how her kangaroo's doing and all the typical Australian questions. And
I love it. Well, I don't know if I've ever had shrimp on the Barbie, to be honest.
Oh, me too. I'm not a shrimp person. Yeah.
I mean, I'll have my steak on the Barbie. We don't normally have shrimp every night. No, but the wallabies, I grew up with a lot of wallabies, which are like smaller kangaroos, and they were hopping around, had to put claims into my car occasionally because it had, hit the side or whatever.
Oh my goodness.
The poor thing. But yeah, there were always like wallabies around on our farm growing up. So they're all doing great. Thanks for asking.
I'll tell them, they'll be thrilled. Well, getting back to the whole reason for the interview, you did realize very quickly you were only married a total of 2 years, I think. So
2 years. Yeah.
Tell me how things first started to be destructive in your marriage.
I didn't actually realize how bad things were until the marriage imploded after being married for about 2 years. But looking back, there was love bombing during the dating season. There was not well regulated emotions during the engagement period. And then I guess as once you get married, and it's hook, line, and sinker situation for a lot of these relationships that turn out to be destructive. So it's a catch and then flip to more destructive behaviors after that. So things started to get I remember saying to my mom a few weeks before everything kind of exploded that I feel like I'm in a chess match with him and I just can't win. And I know that I'm not a dumb person. I know that I have good conflict resolution skills. I know that, I grew up being taught about, I have 3 siblings, so there were lots of tensions growing up, as there are with siblings. And my parents really took advantage of that to teach me good skills. So I know I have a good foundation. I know someone can't be wrong 100% of the time, right? Like there's got to be some give and take, but there just wasn't. And I was starting to feel more and more trapped in the relationship, and more fears and feeling like I was crazy.
So give me an example of the things that you guys would fight about or that were issues.
I remember one time we were having a fight. I can't remember what it was about, but then I interrupted him to clarify. I think it would say like, please don't say never, because we've agreed in the past not to say never and always when we're fighting. That's not fair. And he interrupted me and that was okay. But then when I interrupted him, it wasn't okay. And so then we got into this whole fight about how it was okay for one of us to interrupt, but not the other, and the type of things. One of the things that was a constant theme was I couldn't question his character. And he would say things like, I feel like you're questioning my character. And in my mind, we all have room for growth, right? So,
Mhm.
and that's part of the joy and the privilege and the hardship of being married, is that it's like holding a mirror up to your face. And unfortunately, the other person does sometimes need to say some hard truths to bring you closer to who God wants you to be. And yet, he had a lot of reign to speak into my life when something wasn't right. Another thing that I found really challenging was, after being married only a couple of months, he said that it was a good thing he was a manipulator, and that it was a talent that he had, that he could just take the truth and just twist it a little bit. And I was like, don't use that word. That's not a good thing.
That's really shocking to me that he would admit that,
Yeah,
and
he took pride in it.
that's just surprising to me that he would own it and take pride in something like that,
Exactly.
yeah.
And there is a place for persuasion and discussion and helping people see a different side of the story. But manipulation has a lot of negative connotations to it. It's associated with you getting your way at the detriment of another person. And that is not good, especially in a marriage. So he never said it again for about 2 years. And then a few weeks before everything kind of exploded, again, we got into a fight about whether he was about how manipulation was a good word, and I put in some boundaries about how I'm not going to continue in this conversation, and that wasn't good, and didn't want me to look up the dictionary to see, what the dictionary had to say about the word manipulation. That was a bit of an eye opener for me, or a shock to me, because I thought we had settled it back at the start of our marriage that he wasn't going to manipulate, that it wasn't a good word. But turns out all along he still thought it was good. And who knows how often he had been manipulating me intentionally, even though he didn't say that's what he was doing or bring up the word or use the word in that 2-year period.
And there was also gaslighting and some demeaning.
Yeah, he would say things like, if I tried to challenge him or put a boundary in place, he would put it back on me and say, well, you're not perfect in this area, so who are you to say that to me? Or he would say, I'm a country girl, like I said, grew up with wallabies on the property, and he was a city boy, and that's okay. That's something people can work through. But it was constantly demeaning me for my in my country, quote unquote, characteristics, or things I did and didn't know about city life, which is fine. I can handle a joke, but it crosses a line at some point, when they start to look down on you and you're the butt of constant jokes. And it was bigger picture with his family doing the same thing. He thought I had borderline personality disorder. And to clarify, I have friends with BPD, and it does not make you any less of a human, but it is still a very big judgment call to make about someone based on a few small experiences.
That's kind of one of my pet peeves, honestly, is I don't like it when people label other people and they're not a professional. So whether it's narcissist or BPD or autism or whatever, it's like, you know,
Absolutely.
we could all be labeled something, but let's just
Mhm.
leave that to
Yeah.
people that went to college and got the degree and know what they're talking about.
I remember thinking when it all happened, and I started the process of talking to doctors and talking to other people, because, he had been chipping away at my self-worth for 18 months or so at that point. I remember thinking, man, like, either this is a helpful thing, or this is a really bad situation for our marriage. And I didn't want to face reality.
As far as his emotional regulation, you said that he would actually throw himself on the floor and cry?
Yeah, it was like a toddler throwing a tantrum, really, and would say, "Oh, I just can't." He would be crying, "Oh, I just can't handle all of the fighting. I can't," that. And I think, yes, there was some inability to, like you say, to not regulate, but he had not chosen to do that do that work. But I think also there were some crocodile tears and some manipulation of the situation, because I'm a very compassionate person, and so I would see he was utterly overwhelmed. I would see how much of an impact it was having on him, and I would lay off. I remember one time this was the only time he did it, but he slammed his hand quite hard on the table and yelled, "Enough." And that scared me, because he had never been a violent person, um, and it was really unlike him, but also not a nice situation for anyone, or particularly a woman, to be in. So I said, "Look, I'm going for a walk until we're both cooled down." But as soon as he did that, he was on the floor crying, as if he's to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." But it was at that point I was like, "No, you can't just act like that and say sorry and expect me to fawn all over you because you've said sorry. I need to calm down."
And in addition to this, you found out that he had an issue, some sexual issues as well.
Yeah, and this is um it's quite um sad and unfortunate. So I asked him when we were dating if he had ever had any sexual addictions, past or present, because it's a very common thing for guys and for girls, but especially for guys, to be struggling with. And so I just wanted to know where he was at, if it had been an issue. And he said no. He came clean on some of the stuff, but not all of it. And then a month before we got married, I was reading a book by Sheila Gregoire Ray. They said, look, if he has one of these sexual addictions, he probably has other ones, unfortunately. So I asked him again, and he did come clean about about his pornography usage, which was quite devastating. At the time, he was really broken and upset about it. I know that pornography doesn't have to be a deal breaker in a marriage in some ways, but at the same time, it's cheating. And I just want to say that really clearly. It is cheating. And so we went and got some advice, and our beautiful, well-meaning pastors said, "Look, you guys can still get married, but this is the start of a really long road." And unfortunately, as it played out, he got the girl. So why did he need to do the work? And so for the next 2 years of our marriage, he didn't consistently have counseling. He ignored the pastor who was trying to reach out and connect with him and mentor him. He didn't read the books that people gave him. He didn't put the blockers on his computer or anything like that. I remember one time I saw his Instagram explore page, and it was full of scantily clad women. And that really triggered me. And he was like, "Look, that's just what guys' accounts look like," which is absolutely
Not
not
true.
true, because it's just based off what you're searching. So most guys who are not focusing on that will be full of, I don't know, motorbikes and boy stuff, whatever guys are into. Does not have to be full of scantily clad women. So there was, I guess, constantly trust broken in that way. And he got cagier and cagier about how often he was looking, what he was looking at, what he was doing about it. And I remember towards the end, I asked him, because we'd watch a TV show like a sitcom or something, and it would trigger me because it's funny to the world. It's just normal to the world, but Christians are called to a higher standard. So there was a story or something, and it triggered me from watching this TV show about his usage. And I asked him, and it was suddenly my bedtime. And it was suddenly, "We'll talk about this later," which whenever he said that, we barely ever, if ever, did ever get back to those appointments, or to those conversations rather.
So he avoided dealing with the problem.
He avoided it. Yeah.
Even if he did the work, if you postponed the wedding or whatever, if his motivation was just to get the girl, then it's really not heart work.
No, it's not.
So then it's not going to be something that lasts. The motivation has to be he wants to get well, and it doesn't seem that he did.
I don't think that they were fully pretend tears and upset. I don't think he was. I'm not sure, and maybe only God knows whether, and it's between him and God, as to whether he was sad at getting caught. I think he was sad at the shame,
Yes.
but it didn't, I think he was so caught it up in the shame, but still wasn't convicted of the grossness of the situation to motivate him to change. So he was stuck in a perpetual cycle of shame and addiction and shame and addiction, and couldn't, that wasn't enough to break him out of it.
Things kind of hit a wall at a wedding, I believe it was.
Yeah, so we had gone to a wedding and we had an argument about something and about how he was going to approach a thing he was doing for people at the wedding. It had kind of all fallen apart, this project he was doing for them. So we're trying to make do something to not let the bride and groom down. We had a fight about it. He sulked in the car for about an hour and a half. So he missed, a good chunk of the reception.
That's a manipulation move right there.
Yeah. And it seemed we always fought when there was a wedding or a big event or something was going on, and I think one of the things that consistently happened was I often felt shunted to the side. If there were other people there, they were instantly more important than me. Even just, when you go to a wedding, it's basically a date for all of the married couples who are attending, right? You get dolled up, you watch a cheesy love story, you have some photos, you have
Exactly.
good
Yeah.
food, you hang out with your friends, do a bit of dancing. It's supposed to be great fun. That didn't happen on this night. He sulked, he wouldn't look me in the eye, which was awkward because we were sitting opposite each other. We went up to all watch the bride and groom do their first dance, and when someone is staring straight ahead because they know that you're looking at
Yeah.
them and they don't want to acknowledge you, that's what was happening. And because we'd already, all of the couples had been invited to dance, and there was no way he was going to ask me to dance, which could have been a really beautiful way to reconnect, to just say sorry, bit of slow dancing, let's start again. But no, that wouldn't happen. And then he said afterwards, look, I am spent. I have no energy left. He did have some health issues as well. So that was an explanation of sorts. I have no energy, just go and talk to other people. But later found him talking to he had moved, he was relaxed, he was enjoying himself, big smile on his face, having an in-depth conversation with a mate. So he did have the capacity, he just didn't want to connect with me. When we volunteered at things, he wanted to go our separate ways and do different things. And like I kind of alluded to before, I was just the pretty girl on his arm who was also his housekeeper and his laundry woman and the breadwinner and the shopper and the person who kept everything running, both financially and in the household. I represented us at church. I represented us in Bible study because he wasn't going to those things very often. Anything ministry wise, I think he was very focused on what was a ministry thing. So anything ministry, anything that made him look good, anything where he could give to other people, he was all there. But it got to the point that I wasn't even really getting the leftovers. And again, he had some health issues. So I understand that, and I promised in sickness and in health. But in the last 4 to 6 months, it changed from him being too unwell to be able to do anything to him choosing not to do anything. We put plans in place to try and rebuild his health, and he wasn't doing those things. And he had the energy to play on a VR station with his mates that he quote unquote was mentoring, but he didn't have the capacity to go for a 10-minute walk around the block with his wife. He wanted to take time off, to leave without pay, to have a Star Wars marathon with his mates on May the 4th.
So it sounds like he still wanted to be a kid.
Yeah, he wanted to be a kid. And yet when I said, look, I'm not saying I am your mother because I know no one loves to hear that, but I feel like a mother figure. Like I feel like I'm playing the role of your mom. And he got really defensive whenever I said that. But that is how I felt. Like I was providing everything. I was being the responsible one and doing the budget, doing everything. And look, if he was really sick, then sure. But it got to a point where he just wanted to be a kid, and that wasn't okay. So I remember sitting down the next day at church after the wedding. I got talking to our youth pastor's wife, and I think it was just one of those God things, when everything just kind of comes together. And I just sat down, let out a deep breath, and was like, well, there's this and there's this and there's this. And she asks me that question all the time, but it was something, I don't know, I guess after the wedding and the disappointment of what had happened, that all these different things came out. And some of it, like she said to me later, some of these things are pretty obvious. Like, he's not coming to church, he's not going to Bible study, he's not looking after his health, he's barely working. These are things that are fairly obvious to anyone. You don't have to know us very well. You have to have a surface level conversation to learn that those things are happening. Her husband joined me and we were talking about all of this, and they said, you know what? Those things that you expect, your heart, your disappointments in how your marriage is going, that's all reasonable. And the things you want your marriage, like your vision for your marriage, is actually really reasonable to ask that of him. And having that person validate that was huge for me, to just know, oh, okay, so it's not that like you have to work crazy hard or earn that. You do have to work hard, but you don't have to work. It's not like I'm a lesser human being who's never going to be able to have what I aspire to. It's that things are out of whack and it's not all on me. And I know that I was not perfect in our marriage.
I think that's so healthy and so needed, though. Sometimes when you're in the middle of it,
Mm-hmm.
you can't, you feel the craziness, but
Yes.
you start questioning yourself. You start wondering what's real, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes, another party can point things out in you that, no, you need to change. So that's fine. But to be
Yeah.
validated and say, you're not crazy. You're not
Yes.
asking too much. This is
Yes.
reasonable. What he's doing is not okay. I think having another person point that out is so important when you're in the middle of the crazy. Do you wonder whether your marriage is just difficult or if it's actually destructive? Leslie has a quick start guide that will help you answer that question. Not only that, if you find your marriage is in the destructive category, this guide will give you concrete biblical answers on your next steps. Go to leslievernick.com/start to get your free quick start guide and start a personal growth journey that will impact all of your relationships. I gave you a pretty important recommendation. What was that?
Yeah. So they recommended that I bring those things up. And I can't remember if they recommended it or if I decided I was going to do it. I think we had the same idea at the same time, to write a letter. And it wasn't so much that I could say, package it up and go, here, read this. It was more so that I had it in writing what I wanted to say, so that I wouldn't get angry and so that I would stay on track. Also, because of his manipulative and gaslighting, demeaning tendencies, I didn't want him to twist my words. And so this way, it would hopefully not, I would be able to stay more in control of the situation. So I wrote it out and I slept on it. I prayed about it. I read the letter to them the next day. I was on holidays for that week, so there was no work, and it was holidays for him as well. So we had the time during the day. And I read it to them. I read part of it to my mum. She didn't know very much at all what was going on, but I read a part of it to her, and I really focused on myself and how I felt in the situation. This is the fact. This is what happened. I was hurt because you did this. This is important to me because blah. And can we please work on this? Or I implemented a boundary, or I asked if this was a way that he could amend the situation, to restore our marriage. And they were things like, he was hoarding and we couldn't park my car in our double lockup garage, and that had always been the agreement, that he could use the garage for whatever, but I needed to be able to park my car in there as well. And that just wasn't happening. So I was like, this is important to me because we put a lot of effort into what makes you thrive. But I think it's important that there are some things in life that help me thrive. And a clean and tidy space is one of those things. We had agreed that the garage would at least be able to fit my car into it. And I'm not really coping with that being messy. It's really stressing me out. You couldn't even walk. You could barely walk to the washing machine and the freezer in it. I had to step onto a drop saw to be able to get into my freezer. It was pretty bad. So can we please, over the next 2 weeks while you're on holidays, can you please focus on this? And I'm happy to help, but can you please get this done by the end of the school holidays? And it was things like that. And look, it was a long letter. There was a lot to say. And at this point I had tried. I don't necessarily think it's always the best way to write a big long letter of everyone's faults the first time you bring it up. But in this situation, it had been 2 years of all of this stuff, or 2 years of the mess, of feeling pushed to the side, of me being the only one cooking the dinner, of me being the main breadwinner, of all these things. I said in the letter, look, if you need some time away, that's fine. Maybe we can come back in a few hours, do something fun together. And he said he needed to think about it. So he wrote off, and I think he went to his parents, and he was there until midnight. Wouldn't answer calls or respond to me or anything, turned off his location on his phone pretty quickly, and said, look, I'm going to move into the other bedroom, which was something we'd always agreed we would never do, no matter how mad we were at each other. I'm going to move into the other bedroom. I love you, but I'm going to have to think about this. I'm going to fast, except for a bit of sugar to keep me going. And basically was very formal to me for the next couple of days. It was a bit awkward because I was on holidays and he was on holidays. So we were both in the house together. But I was like, it was such a God thing of giving me just peace and strength to know what to do and to not let him. And this is what I learned about in Conquer about being in core was, I'm not going to let him determine my mood. I'm not going to let him change my plans or rob me of peace. So I'm going to go to the beach like I planned on doing. I'm going to do some shopping like I planned on doing. These are my holidays. I'm going to do what I want to do during this time. But he spoke to me very formally, didn't really want to talk to me. He was in and out of appointments. And then Wednesday night, so that all happened on the Monday when I read him that letter. Then on the Wednesday night, I was like, it's been 48 hours. Like, that's a reasonable amount of time to talk about stuff. So I tracked him down at his parents, and it was very awkward. They didn't invite me into the house, even though we'd always been really close. They didn't. They ignored me until they were ready to meet me, or he was ready to walk to the door to talk to me. He wouldn't tell me who he'd been talking to. He didn't tell me when he would have it. He said he needed more time and that he wasn't ready. He was a bit angry. And so, again, don't know what gave me, except for God, gave me the wisdom to say, look, I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sad because it doesn't need to be this way. But clearly, there's no point in us continuing to have a conversation because, we're not going to get anywhere. So I'll see you later. And I just bawled once I got back into my car. I was so distraught. And I went and spent the night with these friends. And the next morning, he sent me a text to say, this is all bigger than one conversation. I've reached my mental and physical breaking point. I've sought medical advice, and I've been told my health has reached a critical condition. I've been prescribed 6 weeks of isolation from my current situation. So please don't try to contact me or find me. I'll be in touch with you when I'm ready for 6 weeks, a minimum of 6 weeks. So at this point, it felt like he held all the cards, and I go home to my house, and his side of the wardrobe is completely empty. He had taken all of his technology with him, all of the PlayStation sort of stuff. He had taken his favorite, most expensive board games, his pillow. He had left his Bible behind, interestingly. He also took our marriage certificate and his ID, like birth certificate and things like that. But the fact that he took the marriage certificate, I was the one who changed her name. So if anything, I'm the one who needs the marriage certificate Otherwise, it just sits in a drawer. So I don't know why he needed it. I think it was a bit of a power move. Oh, and he took the Nutella as well. I wasn't very happy about that.
That's going too far.
I was on the phone to my mum when this happened, and I just sunk to the floor crying, remembering that year God had given me the word faithful, that I'd prayed, what is my word for the year, God? And he said faithful. And I thought it was about me being faithful, and about me being faithful in the little things, and even had a bit of a sense that it would be the toughest year yet for our marriage. And turns out it was. But as I was like, Mum, this is why God gave me the word faithful. And she's like, yeah, faithful to God, not just to your marriage, but being faithful to God and God being faithful to you. So my mum flew straight over, which, she lives on the other side of the country. So she flew straight over, bless her, and the truth started to come out, because he would isolate me from my family and from my friends, would demean my family. He would demean my family. There were obviously things that you process about, oh, my childhood was like this or like that. And I think he grabbed hold of the tiny negative things that happened in my family and made them bigger deals, or would just he wouldn't overtly discourage me being with my family or talking to them, but he would make fun of them, or would just not put the effort in himself and really prioritized his family, who lived around the corner. So it left me feeling like I couldn't really trust my family. They weren't particularly close. You know how parents see these things. Parents know, even though they didn't know the full extent of the situation, they had some concerns and saw potential and was like, yeah, he's marrying up, and that's okay. But he has potential, but they didn't really ever fully gel. And my parents tried for sure, but there was just something off that they could sense.
At what point in all of this did you find Leslie and conquer?
Again, such a God moment. I think I was looking online for Christian resources to do with this, because, like, what do you do? Like, it's such an unusual situation. And I can't remember if I found it on Lisa TeKirst's or again on Sheila's website, that I found found the Conquer and Leslie's website.
And Conquer was open.
It was open. Exactly. It was like right then. I had a couple of days left, and we were like, whoa, what are the chances? Because it only opens twice a year. And so to have that resource there ready to go was such a blessing. And so we would sit down, my mum and I would sit down, and we would watch a couple of videos in those early days. And it was really validating, because he never hit me. He never slept with another woman. He never, did all of the classic, what we know of as abuse. But Leslie made it really clear how these things are covert abuse, and covert abuse is abuse nonetheless. It's still a form of domestic violence, and that is not keeping your vows, and that is not marriage and not what God intends. And God cares more about the people in the marriage than the institute of marriage itself.
Her teaching on core strength was especially important to you. Why?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of core and also big picture, your big self, and living with your core values. The idea of core being that you're courageously committed to the truth, and that coupled with something that Lisa TeKirst said about mental health is the commitment to reality at all costs. And same, C and core is being courageously committed to the truth. As much as I loved my husband, the truth was he was demeaning me. The truth was, I remember when this truth just started to spill out, unfortunately at a traffic light when I was with my mum, so it was poor timing, but it just needed to come out to say, like, he did this and he does this and he says I'm not good enough at this or this or this. And that was the truth. He said those things. He did those things. He, was being cagey and about his pornography, which could only lead me to, understand that he was still looking at pornography. If it wasn't an issue, you would just be honest about it. So recognizing that this is the truth and that therefore truth has consequences, that was really important. And I think O is being open to God and the Holy Spirit. It was amazing how God had been pulling all these things together, how he had been working in my heart to grow as a human, to overcome my weaknesses in the marriage and become codependent, or different areas in my life, and needed to take the log out of my own eye. And I'd been working on that in the weeks leading up to it, and working on myself during that whole time of our marriage. And so that was a good start and like confirmation that like, no, I need to stay close to Jesus during this time. That's the only way I'm going to make it through. It was amazing. After reading the letter, but before he left, I felt God say, you need to listen to Phil Wickham. And I wasn't a big Phil Wickham I didn't listen to much of his music and a few of his songs, but that was it. But I was like, no, you need to listen to it. And when the Holy Spirit tells you to do something and there's no peace until you do it. And the first song that came on, or one of the first songs, was a song called Battle Belongs. And it's about how when we see a tomb, God sees an empty grave. This is all happening over Easter as well. This whole weekend was like Easter was coming. And so when you see something when we see something broken, you see something beautiful. When we see the battle, you see the victory. And the battle belongs to you, God. It's everything I have, I lay at your feet because you're going to fight for me. And so that song was just on repeat constantly. And all of his songs were just ministering so much to my heart. But having that song over and over was just the anthem of that season for me, and such a gift from God to give that to me. I think as well, one of the R and the E is being responsible for myself and being empathetic towards other people. And I think that's really helpful because it kind of held me accountable to myself to say, no, you don't get to call him names. You don't get to slander him. You don't get to play dirty like he's playing dirty. Like he sent me some pretty nasty texts and didn't want to give or anything. And I'm like, no, God calls me to keep my heart soft. God calls me to be pure and to be holy because God is holy. And just because I'm going through a terrible situation, that doesn't give me the freedom to respond at his level. As
Right.
Leslie pointed out, the whole point of conquer is that we conquer evil with good, and we're going to choose good in response to that evil. And part of that is being responsible for myself, for my attitude, for my heart, and getting to make decisions that glorify God no matter what other people are doing, no matter what he is doing. I still need to choose to do what is right. And I still need to be compassionate and empathetic to his behavior. Well, not to his behavior rather, but to himself.
You did recognize through this process of learning that you have a tendency to be somewhat codependent
Yeah.
in your
Yeah.
relationships. How is realizing that changing your approach to relationships and
Mm.
self-care and everything today?
One of my catchphrases was, and I thought at the time it was cutesy, but it's not. I'm not okay if you're not okay was like my catchphrase right back when we were dating. And if you were grumpy, then I'm unsettled until you sort this out.
That's not healthy.
It's so not healthy. No, it actually gave him more power. He's like,
Yes, it
oh,
does.
well,
So all I have to do is sulk in the car for an hour and a half at the wedding,
yep,
and she's gonna
yep,
come, taking care of me and chasing after me, and
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And um, he would do things like even if we had made up and like we'd had a fight and we'd reconciled or sorted out our differences, he would still sulk, or he would hold my hand, but it was like holding a dead fish. And that was still he just still wasn't okay, and so that would still set me on edge until he decided he wanted to start love bombing me again, or start till he was decided it was okay. And that was really hard, but a really hard situation to be in. But we have choices. We may not like the choices, and one thing that I find really hard is the idea of needs. And do I need this? Do I need that? Do I need, what are my emotional needs? Are they truly a need or just a want? And having been rejected so much in our relationship, sexually, physically, emotionally, mentally, in so many ways, really downplayed that my needs were selfish, or that I didn't those needs weren't right to have or were too high an expectation. I think I have to separate them a little bit, because in order to have a healthy marriage, these things are needed. But in order for me to be okay, and as Leslie says in one of her videos, you may not be great, you may not be on top of the earth, and feeling wonderful about life, but you will be okay if you put these boundaries in place, if you look after yourself, if you say no, if you choose to live God's way instead of kneeling over to whatever he wanted, you will be okay. And so I think recognizing that and learning that and starting to look back and go, oh, okay, so yeah, these things may not have happened, and yeah, we needed them in our marriage for our marriage to thrive, but I don't need them as a human being, because God gives me everything that I need, and he provides for us through other people. Sure, but if he's not going to provide for it in my husband, which is the ideal example, he will either provide it through another person, through friendship, or a pastor will pray with me, or whatever it might be, or God will come through for me directly in a very spiritual and special way.
Your marriage did not survive. How did that decision come about?
After about 3 weeks, I think 3 to 4 weeks of that 6-week separation, I remember left my Bible study. I just couldn't stay. I had to leave early. Something wasn't right. And I just spent the whole drive home sobbing and crying and screaming, like, God, I'm sorry, but I'm done. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, God, but I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I just can't. I can't stay in this marriage any longer. I can't keep going on. This isn't right. It was just a moment, and people talk a lot about when you know, and women will get to a point where they break. And as people say, that can actually be the most beautiful moment where you're free to start healing at that point. So, and as I studied more through Leslie and other resources, to go, God hates divorce it because it means that someone has done violence to the woman he vowed to protect. And that was huge for me, to come to that realization that, yeah, it may not have been physical violence, but it was still emotional violence. It was not honoring or cherishing or protecting or providing and choosing his wife like he promised to on our wedding day. He'd broken every vow, and therefore I was free to leave. And so that moment was like a real pivotal moment for me to go, look, I'm done. And that's when I started to consider that I don't think this is going to work, because during that 6 weeks of silence, even though he said not to contact him, I did reach out. I did get marriage counseling. I did say, look, we need to be and I gave him a warning. I said, if you don't want this to end in separation and divorce, we need weekly counseling now. You don't need to move back into the house, but I need to know where you are. What is physically wrong with you? I don't think he actually was in critical condition, because critical condition means that, you're on life support. And he wasn't. I knew that for a fact, that he wasn't. So yeah, I was like, this is where we're headed. And after about 3 weeks, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is not looking good. And by the 6th weeks, I had to do it over a text message because he refused to call or let me call him. I just said, it's been 6 weeks and you haven't communicated, and we have a different vision for our marriage. So this marks the start of our separation. And from there, I'll be applying for divorce.
Did he ever try to fight for it, or?
No, I said in that message, I said, I've preemptively made an appointment with a counselor who's aware of our situation and is prepared to help with the practical and emotional sides, hear each other's story, how we got to this situation, and then, make the divorce happen. His only response to that whole text message and situation was, I can't make that time. I'll only talk to you via text. And never tried to fight after that.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you didn't have somebody who wanted to fight and to get well. But
Yeah.
how are you doing today?
So that all happened between April and May 2023 in Australia, or in Queensland. You have to do 12 months of separation before you can apply for divorce, which was a fairly straightforward process because we didn't have kids. We didn't, it was just a very easy process for us. It was just the paperwork. So it's been about 18 months now since all of this went down. And I am so grateful to God for this situation because, as through the stories that I've told and so many other different little things, it was not a healthy marriage. And there was a lot of damage that had been done, not only to myself and himself, but to the marriage. And there's a lot of trust that was broken. And God can restore anything, but he also says that we reap what we sow. So I am very grateful that he rescued me, because things often just get worse. They don't get better, unfortunately, in these sorts of situations, especially when it's covert abuse, because it's their way or the highway. So I'm very grateful that God got me out of that situation. I did love him, but that is in the past and I can't be with that person anymore.
Yeah.
And so I'm just so grateful. I had so much peace and joy during that whole situation. People would say to me, "How are you not in bed?" And I'd be like, well, by the joy and the grace and the love of God. Honestly, God used the broken parts to help me face the truth, to give me the courage. He gave me the courage to face the truth and see it for what it was, and to get me out of there, because he has good plans for me and he has something better in store for me. And that was not his desire for his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And so God has just given me so much peace, so much joy. I moved into a smaller house that I just love. I like to say it's me-sized, and it's just perfect. It's so easy to clean because it's so small.
Oh,
And
that sounds really nice.
I
As I have like 3 floors and,
oh
yeah.
no. Yeah, it's great. And my work has been awesome. I've got so many opportunities through that. My dad and I flew to Tasmania earlier in the year, and we did this 4-day hike, something we'd been planning on doing for years and years. God just gave me the perfect church with beautiful friends. I have a great support network of people. I'm really close to my family and my friends again. And I just sense that God is good. That's, I guess, been my story out of it, is that God acts and God rescues, and God doesn't desire for us to be stuck in terrible situations, and he will use it for good. As much as sometimes it makes me sad that, I'm in my early 30s and I'm not a mum yet. I've always wanted to be a mum, and so to not have that happen in my 20s is really sad, and I have grief over that my marriage didn't work out, and that, if I go, that will always be a thing there in my, practically and emotionally, it'll be there, but God heals our wounds.
I didn't get married until I was 33. I had my first one at
Mhm.
35, and my last one, I was 2 months shy of 43 when I had my last baby. So you got
Oh,
plenty of time.
wow. That's also got plenty of time. Yeah. It's just not the story that childhood me thought I would go through, or even the girl who walked down the aisle thought she was going to have.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's grief in that, but at the same time, I'm so glad that I'm out of that situation. I've been given a story that I hope will help other people to see situations for what they are, and to help people know that they're not alone and that there is hope. God is the God of hope.
Talk to that lady who is
Mm,
listening and in the middle of the crazy,
yeah.
trying to understand, well, he doesn't hit me, but there's all this gaslighting going on, and well, he watches porn, but he's not physically sleeping with another person. Like, she's in the middle of that crazy.
Yeah.
Talk to her. What advice would you give her?
Mm. You are not crazy. You are made in the image of God. You are beautifully made. You are perfectly and wonderfully made. He delights in you. He sings over you. God honors and respects you. Your value does not come from what he says about you. You have been given talents. You have been given a gift and a purpose. And he does not actually get to take that away from you. He doesn't get to take your worth away from you. He doesn't get to take away your opportunities or your desires. God has given you those desires for a reason, and He doesn't get to take that away from you. Your opinions, they matter. I want to hear what they are. Other people in the world want to hear what you have to say, the way you think it, the way you see it. You are the light of the world. Jesus lives inside of you, and that Holy Spirit lives through you. And you do not need to let him, another person, your husband, snuff that out. He doesn't actually have that power. And I'm so sorry that you're going through this. And I'm so sorry that it is hard and it's not pretty. And walking in core strength, whether you stay with him or leave, won't be pretty. It might not be great. It won't be the situation you dreamed for, but God will be enough for you. God is enough, and God will come through for you in miraculous ways, in little ways, and He will be your husband in a way that He will fill those needs in a way that nobody else can. And He loves you perfectly. So press on, even if it is an uncomfortable situation. In the midst of walking wisely, it's worth it. There is so much joy in walking wisely. So don't give up.
Well, I don't think I have anything else to say or to add to that. That was beautiful. And Jessica, I speak for everybody listening when I just say, God bless you as you continue to follow him. And I think God knows the desires of your heart. And I pray that you will see that happen in your future.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and letting me share my story. It's been such an honor.
You're so welcome.
Thank you for listening to Relationship Truth Unfiltered. If you need clarity on whether your marriage is difficult, disappointing, or destructive, go to leslievernick.com/start for Leslie's free quick start guide. It's totally private and will help you get clear on your next step. Again, that's leslievernick.com/start. Until next time, may God bless your relationships with Him, with yourself, and with others.